This video is going to be a quick introduction to instructional design and also talk a little bit about the field as a whole and what jobs it might include. So, if you are new to instructional design or have never heard before, it's actually a little bit tricky to define. When people ask what I do for a living and I say, oh, I teach instructional design or I'm an instructional designer, they don't have much of a reference to understand what I mean. What they usually say is, oh, you mean like wallpaper and paint and furniture selection? They think I mean interior designer, and I say, no. It is a kind of design, but what I do is all about creating effective learning experiences. And I've tried to think of the most succinct way to describe what I do for many years, but when you say something like, I create effective learning experiences, unless they're an educator, they're not going to be very excited by this. So another way I also describe what I do is I teach online. I teach people to teach online. I create ways for people to learn online. There's going to be some other ways to explain what you do as well. The fact is, this is just a really big field with a lot of subspecialties in it that are required to be a good instructional designer. But a more succinct way to define instructional design, if you're looking for the more academic definition, it's a systematic structuring and development of content and experiences to facilitate learning. Again, not really great dinner conversation, but I think this is probably the best definition you can get at for this field. How you'll end up defining it will be up to you and probably depend on what you do as a specialty in the field. And I tell people, when you are doing instructional design, this is kind of how it feels. Please excuse the cheesy meme. There's so much that goes into it, from visual communication, graphic design, interaction design, learning theory, how people learn, and you're considering all these factors as you're trying to create an effective learning experience. And the more you consider all these factors and incorporate things that are relevant to your learning audience, the more effective the learning experience is going to be. But when you're first getting started with instructional design, this can feel overwhelming. And quite frankly, later on, if you've been doing it for a while, it can still feel a little overwhelming at times, but you get better at it. If you are new to the field or thinking about a career change, I wanted to include a list of job titles so you can kind of see the breadth of what's possible in this field. Of course, there's the old classic, you just get called an instructional designer, at the top there. It can be a learning and development specialist, learning experience designer. I like the newfangled titles like learning engineer, learning architect. I feel like these titles are trying to get at the complexity of instructional design. You're doing more than just, training someone, though that is a subset of instructional design as well. You're doing more than just e-learning design, more than just development. You're really engineering or being the architect of a complete learning experience. But no matter what your interests are, this is a wonderful, varied field with a lot of specialties. You can work solo, you can work with a team, you can be part of a huge organization, you can be part of a small nonprofit. There's so many places to work and so many different formats of hierarchies that you might work in, and so many specialties that you might focus on. I do want to cover the systematic part of instructional design. If this is all about using systems, let's talk about what those are. They're really not that complicated at first. When you dive in, they get more complicated. In my experience, I've used these two instructional design models. There are more instructional design models out there. I find these to be the most accessible and most practical for what I do, which is, again, I teach online in a graduate program. I also do freelance training. I do freelance course conversions or products for other people, usually in the nonprofit or education field. But there's two main models. ADDI is kind of the classic. ADDI stands for Analyze, Design, Develop, Implement, Evaluate. And then there's a SAM model, which stands for Successive Approximation Model. And this is more about rapid prototyping. So let's look a little bit more in depth at what each of these means. So when it comes to ADDI, ADDI is commonly called more of a waterfall model because you kind of start at one end and every step kind of flows into the next, right? And this is an oldie but goodie. It has its place. The idea is that you start with a really thorough analysis of what the learning problem is, who your learners are, kind of the platform, how you're going to teach them. And only once the analysis is done, you move into the design phase. And so this is all about figuring out exactly what you're going to teach, how you're going to teach it, before you even start developing the learning experience itself. So if you're developing like an e-learning course, you might do a thorough analysis. In design, you might do like a storyboard and a flow chart to start mocking up what your e-learning is going to look like and how it's going to function. And only then, once that's all done, you actually build it out, plop it into a learning management system, and then, evaluate how it went later on. The challenge with ADDIE is that there's not really a lot of room for error or for big changes. So say you do an incorrect learning analysis up here, whether because you don't understand exactly who your learning audience is, or maybe your subject matter expert miscommunicated to you who the audience is, something big happens, that affects your design, that affects your development, and it's really hard to go back and fix things later on. That said, I think this is a wonderful, perfect model for people new to instructional design to start working with to get a feel for how the process works and how to come up with a system later on that works for you. So in contrast, we have the SAM model, again, successive approximation model. This is based on a book by Richard Seitz, I believe. He came up with this model. He's a corporate instructional designer. I should say he's probably a lead of an instructional design team. But this is a rapid prototyping model. Whereas ADDIE, one step leads into the next, and you're really, really thoughtful about how this whole process is going to flow. With the SAM model, you do a quick analysis, you do a quick design, you do a quick development, and then you kind of start it over again. So the idea is that you do a really quick kind of startup, what they call a savvy start meeting, to kind of get an idea of what the learning problem is, and you basically just start designing and building right away. You make something rough, you consider how it works, reanalyze it with your audience, and do another version. So this is like the idea where you make a prototype, you make another prototype, you make another prototype, you do rapid prototyping, you keep on revising, you might throw it out, start all over again, and you can see this is a huge contrast to the ADDIE model where you're really thoughtfully going through the whole process. And again, you'll figure out which model kind of works for you. I would say SAM works better if you're more of an experienced instructional designer, or you're someplace where you don't know exactly what the client is looking for, so you want to kind of start feeling them out by making prototypes, and they can kind of guide you as you go through them. So to recap, ADDIE is wonderful, but does have an emphasis on analysis and design. It is time intensive, and you kind of have to do it right the first time. If you screw up something in an earlier step, it's going to dramatically affect your later steps. Whereas SAM is more about just diving in, adjusting as needed, prototyping, and lots of revising. Again, I think ADDIE is the perfect, wonderful model for someone new to instructional design, whereas SAM is great to use if you are working with a client that doesn't know what they want, or you're not clear about what they want, or you need to get something kind of up and running really quickly. But if you have the time, ADDIE is a good choice for kind of being really thorough and conscientious as you move through the process. Let's go ahead and wrap up. Just to recap, ADDIE is great for new instructional designers. ADDIE is sort of like all the rules of instructional design, and you have to know the rules before you can learn to break the rules. And to me, SAM is a little bit more like breaking the rules, doing some rapid prototyping, but you need to be pretty good at understanding the analysis and the design process before you can really dive in to be effective at rapid prototyping.